There was once a widow who lived with her two daughters in a cottage in the forest. In the garden there grew two beautiful rose bushes, one white, the other red. The two girls were named after the rose bushes. One girl was called Snow White, and her sister was called Red Rose. Snow White was fair, and Red Rose was dark, and both were as pretty as the flowers which they were named. The two sisters always played together. Both of them loved all the creatures of the forest, and would spend many happy hours among the trees and the animals. The forest creatures did not fear Snow White and Red Rose like other humans. They knew the girls meant no harm. Snow White and Red Rose's mother was very proud of her daughters, and they in turn loved her dearly. Their mother, who had to work very hard to provide food for them all to eat, and Snow White and Red Rose did all they could to help her. They cooked and cleaned and sewed their own clothes, and when the rose bushes came to bloom, they made sure that a vase was ready for each of the flowers to be placed into. In the evenings, the two girls would sit by the fire and talk to their mother, or listen to her read stories to them. One winter's evening, while they were happily occupied in this way, came a loud banging on the cottage door. A snowstorm was blowing outside, and the girls thought that a traveller had got lost on his way. But when their mother answered the door, they saw a great big black bear standing there. They were frightened at first, but the bear spoke to them very politely. "Please let me come in and warm for a while. I'm frozen to the marrow." So they let the bear sit by the fire, and the girls swept the snow from around his coat. While Snow White and Red Rose invited them to stay the night, the bear gratefully accepted. Next morning, he lumbered off into the forest again. "Come again whenever you like," said Snow White and Red Rose as he left. The bear came again every night for the rest of winter, and each time he came, the girls would take great delight in playing with him, rolling him over and scratching his stomach, or gently pulling his hair. If their games became too rough, the bear would simply say to them, "Snow White and Rose Red, would you have your sweetheart dead?" When spring came, the bear came to stay one night and told them that he had to go away for the summer. Snow White and Rose Red felt very sad when he waved off into the forest. They did not know what to do when they couldn't see their big bear friend anymore. He had been a good friend to them all, and they would miss him very much. Some days later, when the girls were out in the forest, they found a tiny dwarf, hopping mad, his beard caught in a split he had made in a tree trunk with his axe. Snow White and Rose Red ran to help. "I don't suppose you've come to laugh at me, you stupid creatures," snarled the tiny man. "We've come to help," the girl said. No amount of pulling could free the dwarf's beard, so Snow White took her scissors from her apron and cut it off at the end. "Look what you've done to my beard!" he cried. The dwarf was furious. "A curse upon you!" The dwarf had a big bag of gold next to him. He grabbed it and disappeared under a stone. A few days later, Snow White and Rose Red came across a bad-tempered dwarf again. They were down by the river, and they saw him leaping up and down in the water's edge. His beard had got tangled in a fishing line. A big fish had been hooked onto the other end of the fishing line. It was about to pull the dwarf into the water. Snow White and Rose Red tried to disentangle the beard, but it was no use. They had to cut another bit of the beard off with scissors. The dwarf was not in the least grateful. "My beard! My pride and joy!" he cried with rage. "I'll get you for this!" There was a bag of pearls beside him. He snatched it up, cursing, and disappeared again. Snow White and Rose Red had not seen the last of the dwarf. One day, as they were walking on the moor above the forest, the girls saw a great hawk plunge from the sky towards the earth. They heard a terrible screaming and shrieking, and then saw the hawk trying to take off once again. The girls ran closer and saw the hawk had the dwarf in his talons. Struggling for all he was worth, Snow White and Rose Red were horrified to see the poor little man in such trouble and began to hit the hawk to try to get it to let go of him. After quite a struggle hitting the hawk and pulling the dwarf's coat, the girls finally managed to free the dwarf from the hawk's grasp. The dwarf crashed to the ground with his face red with fury. "Just look at what you've done," he cried. "I'm all battered and bruised and my coat is torn. Did you have to be so rough with me?" The dwarf's rudeness was no surprise to the girls by now. They were used to it. They watched in silence as the dwarf picked up another bag from beside him. This one contained jewels of all shapes and colours. The dwarf clutched the bag tightly to his chest and vanished from sight. The girls carried on their way, their good deed done. They were on their way home from their walk when they came across the dwarf one more time. He did not see them coming and did not know they were there. He had spread out all of his treasures on the ground before him. The gold, the pearls, and the jewels were all there, a magnificent array of wealth which sparkled and glinted in the summer sunshine. Snow White and Rose Red gasped at the sight. Suddenly the dwarf turned. "What are you staring at?" he demanded angrily, and he began to put all his treasures together again, but was stopped with a great roaring sound coming from the trees nearby. His fury turned to terror as he saw a great big black bear crashing through the undergrowth towards him. The dwarf panicked. He knew there was no time to hide. "Oh, Mr. Bear, please forgive me," he cried. "Spare my life, I beg you." The bear moved towards the dwarf relentlessly. "I shall give you all these treasures," the dwarf cried. "Don't kill me. Take these 2 lumps of young girls instead. Eat them for supper." But the pleas of the dwarf were in vain. The bear moved up towards him and gave him a mighty sweep from his paw. The dwarf was knocked to the ground and killed in an instant. Snow White and Rose Red feared for their lives, tried to run away, but the bear called them back. "Snow White, Rose Red, wait for me. Don't be afraid." It was then that the girls recognized the voice of their old friend from winter. They turned their back towards him, just in time to see the bear's skin falling away. There in front of them stood not a bear, but a handsome man dressed in gold clothes. Seeing the girls' astonishment, the man began to explain. "I am a king's son," he said. "That terrible dwarf stole all the treasures from me and changed me into a bear, condemning me to roam the forest as a wild animal until he died. Now he has been justly punished. I am free again." The girls were delighted to see their good friend had recovered all of his treasures and been released from the wicked dwarf's enchantment. They went with the prince to tell their mother the good news. The prince would never forget the kindness that Snow White and Rose Red and their mother had shown towards him during the winter time when he had to live as a bear. In time, the kindness and friendship of the 3 was well rewarded. The prince asked Snow White to marry him and she agreed. Rose Red was married the same time to the prince's brother. The treasures which had been recovered from the dwarf's hiding place ensured that they lived comfortably together. The girl's mother went to live with them all, taking the 2 precious rose bushes from her cottage garden to their new home. Snow White, Rose Red, their princes, and their mother were happy for the rest of their lives.